Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the opening of Aquaman 2, which is not looking all that great, making just a little over $100 million worldwide, only about 28 or so million in the domestic market in its opening weekend. It's expected to get anywhere from 38 to 39 million, with the 4-day total, of course, with tomorrow being Christmas Day, a blessed Sunday to everyone out there, a blessed fourth Sunday of Advent, and a blessed Christmas Eve, of course. We also have the second weekend numbers for Wonka, and we also have some new numbers for films like Migration, amongst many others. Of course, we do also have a lot of films that are coming out at some point today for their premiere, with a full slated release tomorrow on Christmas Day. So we'll obviously have a lot of things to talk about over the course of this week, and I'll try to update y'all when I can, when I get time. But obviously, with it being Christmas time, family becoming first, that's one of the reasons why I'm also a little bit late to this video today. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, a lot of that fire button. Also, smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So first, starting off with Tony over at Deadline. Good old Tony saying, Christmas box office is slowing down at Aquaman 2, 38 to 39, Wonka 26, and Migration at 17 million plus more. So that seems to indicate things aren't going that well. When you jump over to Nance, talking about this from a global scale, she says Aquaman 2 surfs past 100 million in global bow. Wonka still sweet, and Solar sees action deploying near 200 plus million worldwide international, and that's still not going to be enough to make up for the massive $200 million budget, because remember, studios only get about, again, when all is said and done, 50% or so of the actual American box office or North American box office, and then maybe 40% internationally, 25% if they get it released in China. And so let's just say they also have a lot of marketing costs too. So Napoleon ain't anywhere near the budgets that it might actually need to. But it is interesting that they are just talking about how Warner Brothers is owning the 4-day Christmas. That is the actual breaking headline. It looks like maybe it's been changed since even before when I opened this article. That's what I was going based off of here, is the Warner Brothers owning the 4-day, and that might be true, right, with the fact that they have several movies out that are each in these top spots. However, for the individual releases, based off of how much they put into those movies, it's not looking fantastic, at the very least when it comes to Aquaman 2. So let's go ahead and go over to thenumbers.com to talk about those domestic numbers. So as I mentioned, Aquaman only getting $28 million in its 3-day opening. It is expected to get upwards of 40 million or close to 40 million by the end of the day tomorrow. This just does not seem like a movie that's going to be driving out a lot of people. As we all know, a lot of times these superhero movies, right, these high, very heavy CGI action-oriented movies end up doing the best in their opening weekend and then having a massive second weekend drop-off. So I think add to the fact that this film probably got some help from it being the holiday, from a lot of people being off from school on Thursday and Friday for the premiere. Anyone who'd be wanting to see it basically had all the opportunity that they wanted or could possibly ever want to go see it, and you might have some people going to see it tomorrow. But do not be surprised if over the course of this week on those daily numbers, you start to see films like Wonka and films like Migration take those top spots away from films like Aquaman and others, because let's just face it, it's not a good movie, and you add to that the fact that the movie is just coming in, again, beneath what many people had expected going into it, and just $100 million to start off globally is just not very good for a film of this caliber as far as the money spent on the movie, etc. We'll talk about that when we go into the actual charting for the film. But Aquaman is still the number one spot, so yeah, you can run those commercials saying the number one movie in America for at least 1 week. And I honestly think that by next weekend, you're going to have, of course, a slew of new releases that are set to come out just over the course of today and tomorrow. But also, you'll have other films like Wonka, which saw a 55% drop from its first week to its second week. And so that's actually a decent, decent hold for a film like that, for a film that costs as much as it did. This film is getting, is right now around $75 million domestic. So I think $100 million is going to definitely be possible by the end of this week before even the next weekend actually begins. And I honestly do think Wonka will end up being one of those movies that does very, very well in the long term. All right. A lot of that is kind of based off of what I have been what I have been looking at in its daily numbers. And so you have these Sunday numbers here, right, with Wonka dropping around 40%. You then have an increase of 8% from the previous day. You then have an increase of 55% on its Friday, and on its Thursday, a decrease of 4%. So that's the reason why I'm looking at these numbers and I'm thinking, okay, this movie is actually having some pretty decent holds, right? A 26% drop on its first Wednesday, from a 47% increase on its first Tuesday, and that was after a 62% drop from its Sunday to Monday. And again, I think that a lot of what this is showing is the fact that as the days have gone on, as more and more people have gotten out of school, for instance, a lot of those younger audience members, a lot of those families have been starting to go out to support films like Wonka more so than other movies and other releases, right? You have the hardcore fans that are going to see Aquaman, right? Fans of the director, fans of the DCEU. Again, this is the last hurrah of the DCEU as we know it, which for me, I'm like, good riddance, because it's just never been good. But with that being said, Wonka, I do think will probably end up coming out on top on the daily numbers, possibly Christmas Day, possibly the day after Christmas, but sometime this week, I do think Wonka will probably take that number one spot, unless one of the new releases coming out today is able to do so. But of course, we'll talk about that when those films actually come out. The number 3 spot goes to Universal's Migration, $12 million there. This is the new animated feature, which doesn't look all that compelling. It just looks like another just generic standard animated movie. But these are the kinds of films from Universal that can sometimes not do as strong up front, but because of it coming out over the holiday frame and because it is something that at least looks inoffensive, some people might actually be more drawn to go see and support over the holiday season. And so I think Migration could also be a film like Wonka, again, much more family-oriented, family-dominated audience as far as just the makeup of the audience that will probably end up helping it out in the long run. The new film from Sony, Anyone But You, which is a modern-day retelling of a Shakespearean play, if I'm not mistaken. We'll talk about that in a second. $6.2 million there, so again, who's to say whether that's good or not, but definitely about what we would expect from a movie like that. And then number 5 spot goes to Solar, which looks like yet another one of these Bollywood movies that is once again breaking into the top 5 in the domestic market. So, hey, kudos to them for being able to do so. And again, that $6,000 per screen is actually not too far off from what you're seeing in Aquaman. So basically, think about your general showing for Aquaman and going to see a movie in that theater. You're seeing a very similar size audience in your individual theaters for that of Solar. So I do think that is interesting. These films tend to do much better than expected. There's definitely a fan base for Bollywood, both, of course, of any audience that might be more connected to it culturally, but also I know that there are a lot of people that have been big fans of movies like RRR in the past and others. And so it just does not surprise me to see this kind of per theater ratio for it. And then for me, one of probably, if not one of my favorites, probably going to be my number 1 movie of the year. Not going to lie, put my review up on Criticless. Make sure you check that out. Criticless.com, amazing site. I'm not sponsored by them at all. I just love them and love shouting them out. But I gave this film probably, I think, the highest score that I've given to a movie this year and probably even the last several years. And the reason why is because it's just a great film. It deals with a compelling story about this hardcore dad who is very, very much in many ways abusive to his kids, but more so talking about this wrestling family. So if you're wrestling fans, you might like it for that reason alone, but also just telling the story about how these brothers all banded together to get through those difficult times and all the tragedies that unfortunately befell this family. It tells the story of the Von Erich family for anyone who has ever listened or watched wrestling in the past. And I'm someone that went into it not knowing really anything about the history because that was before the time I started actually watching wrestling, and I found it very, very compelling. It's basically what I would like to say an adult male drama. So we have those dramas that are much more, predominantly female audience driven. I think this one's going to be more predominantly male driven. I think whether you're a wrestling fan or not, there's a lot to like in that movie. This movie, luckily, is from A24, and this has probably one of the wider releases from A24. Remember, they're notorious for having the weirdest release schedule. They actually did a full wide release for this movie, and it made around $5 million, so I'm glad to see that. Hope this film does even better. The Boy and the Heron continue to drop off, as well as, again, most animes do in American markets, 43%. Another 745 screens dropped, 3.1 million there. Just barely edged out, in fact, The Hunger Games. So Hunger Games dropped all the way from the number 2 spot to the number 8 spot. So even though this film has crossed $300 million worldwide, and we know that the film has already made its money back, we're still seeing the film basically in its final runs, right? So it's going to do okay over the holiday frame, but because now there are a lot more movies that are going to be much more drawing out that audience that have been going to see it, I do think that it'll start to suffer because of that. And again, I don't think that we're going to see this film do anything close to what the previous Hunger Games films did. Okay, so again, the film made money, but really nothing in comparison to the rest of the franchise. Godzilla Minus One is still indeed in the market. As I'd mentioned, hopefully you saw my stream from this past week where I talked about just how, marketing is done and how booking of theaters is actually done. There was a lot of misinformation out there about people saying, Godzilla's leaving theaters at this specific date. And the fact was they had not yet gotten the booking sheets. They had not yet gotten that information to be able to confirm. All movies work in that way, where all movies are essentially week to week. It's just that the ones that come from the major studios are much more likely going to be there more than just 1, 2, or 3 weeks. So if you have smaller studios or studios that are not known for being in specific markets, it becomes a little bit more dicey, but the same principle is still there. And if you have not seen that video or part of that live stream where I talk about that, I definitely recommend that. That was from this past week. And the number 10 movie is actually a film called Donkey, which I know very little about, but that rounds up that top 10. Going to individual releases, as I mentioned, Aquaman: The Lost Kingdom, $108 million worldwide. So for a movie that cost $205 million, it's made 0.5 times its budget back at this point. It's just not looking that great. Now, we can, of course, put this up against another superhero movie from just recently. Let's put this up against the Marvels just to see exactly where it stands. And yeah, it's not good, right? The Marvels 3-day opening was $46 million. Aquaman: Lost Kingdom is 28. So the Marvels, as we all know, is a massive, massive flop. Aquaman is looking also to be in a very similar position. Now, the one thing that Aquaman will have that the Marvels will not have is a much stronger international audience, because look at that number there. Internationally, Aquaman is already at $80 million, whereas Marvel's, in the entirety of its run, only made $115 million. So Aquaman is definitely going to have a much bigger run there, well over 100, probably somewhere between $100 and $200 million there. It has a chance maybe of getting somewhat in the area of $100 million domestically, but if we know anything from the opening of the Marvels, it opened up to 46 and capped out around 84 million. So it's hard to say even that's going to be possible, but you're still looking at a movie that might make somewhere between $200-300 million worldwide, which is still going to be a far cry from the $500+ million the film actually has to make to break even. And we'll talk about that number in a second. But yeah, for anyone wondering, this film is doing significantly worse. And again, this is over a holiday frame that this movie has come out and has been released, and it's coming in that below. And the fact that by its first Monday, it's going to maybe be able to catch up to what we saw for the Marvels, right? If it gets upwards of that $38 to $40 million, that's still going to be far below. So we'll be continuing to track that to see if Aquaman has any better holds. But based on what we're seeing right now, it is not looking all that great. A much better situation going on right now for Wonka, with the one caveat being that its international is so much bigger than its domestic. And as we've been talking about more recently, that makes a very, very big deal as far as profitability is actually concerned, right? Luckily, it is making a lot of its money from places like the UK, and it is indeed in China, and it's not making as much there. But because it's still looking at a 40% roughly take for the studio in those markets compared to the 55-60% take that they might get domestically, this is not a good position for a film like this to be in. It wants to make more money domestically, or at the very least make a decent amount of money domestically, so that way any amount of money it makes extra overseas where it does not get as much return on investment on, it's able to make those up. I will say, based off of where it was last week, it's about cut in half the amount of money that it still needed to make back. Again, I remember last week it was around about negative $80 million. Now it's around negative 40. So it has indeed made a lot of strides. And as I mentioned earlier, I do think this is going to be a film that does very well over the Christmas holiday season, but it still does have indeed a ways to go. Migration, as I'd mentioned, just looks like a very generic animated movie, but hey, some people might actually be interested in going to see it. $34.2 million there is the international release. They have Anyone But You. This is, as I had mentioned before, the modern day retelling of a Shakespearean story. I was hoping that they would have the the synopsis there that would actually explain what it is. I think it's Much Ado About Nothing, if I'm not mistaken, but I could absolutely be wrong there. This film, though, made $6.2 million. The only person I know in that is Glenn Powell. Glenn Powell had been in the Top Gun Maverick film. He played the foil to the main character in that movie, but still doesn't look like my kind of movie. Definitely looks like a film, though, that could have a much more predominantly female-driven audience. We have then Solar, which looks like, to me, a very generic Bollywood movie. It just is like, oh yeah, that's a Bollywood film. I can see why there would be the same kind of money you typically see get to these types of movies. It's not something that I'm automatically drawn to, but hey, it's doing very well for the amount of theaters that it's in, especially. Iron Claw, as I'd mentioned, fantastic film. Go and see it. Right now, only domestic numbers showing for that. The Boy and the Heron is at $108 million worldwide as it continues its North American release. Hunger Games is at $302 million. So as you can see, even historically, it is definitely towards the higher end as far as its domestic holds are concerned, but still a far cry from the other Hunger Games films. And then the last film I'd talk about internationally is going to be Godzilla Minus One. Still a very low grossing movie if you just compare this to the other Godzilla films from recent memory of the MonsterVerse. However, this film is also so far superior to any MonsterVerse movie that has ever been released. It's sad that the film has not done that much better. As I mentioned, I think domestically it is probably getting hurt more so because of the fact that it is in Japanese and you have to read subtitles, and a lot of people are not drawn to that or don't want to go through that. I've had a lot of people who are actually followers of the channel say the very same thing, and I understand that to an extent, but I think that it is definitely worth seeing in theaters. So if it is playing near you, I would definitely recommend that you go check it out. Let's go ahead and do some box office charting because we love doing charting here over at OMB Reviews. So first off, talking about Migration, The Color Purple, of course, coming out Christmas Day. And I think there's might be a couple of others, but we'll wait for those numbers to actually get released before talking about them. So first talking about with Migration. So $34 million is where that film right now is internationally. That film, when you look at its budget, is on the lower side of things, right? This is one thing Universal is a lot better on than studios like Disney or studios like Warner Brothers, where they just overspend on every single thing they do. When it comes to the Illumination and the Universal animated films, they tend to spend a lot less. So $72 million budget. So that means an average break even, right? A probably conservative break even point is around 180. Maybe we could argue 180 to $250 million. So $34 million is not all that great to start off with, but still, it is, I think, a good start in the sense that it's at the very beginning of the holiday frame, and it's probably going to overperform and do well simply because it is a kids movie, and even a generic kids movie, as long as it does not look offensive, as is the case with most of the Disney film releases where parents just don't really trust them anymore, and for good reason, I think this film could probably do pretty well. Films like The Iron Claw doing $5 million for an A24, limited or I guess more indie release. The fact that the film is already about $19 million in the red, $15 million budget, I think that sounds about right. You get a great film, and it's amazing what you can do with $15 million. Like, it's films like Iron Claw that make me say it's really honestly the people who are running Hollywood that have no idea how to actually spend not only their money, but just to spend money in general, right? I would rather them spend $15 million on their big superhero movie and make a film like Iron Claw, where it's just a well-written, well-crafted story about characters and character development, than spend $100+ million giving me a generic piece of garbage, right? So definitely recommend Iron Claw. Glad to see that it's doing well, but obviously it still also needs to make quite a bit up as well. And because it is a smaller movie, it means that even though that number is a lot smaller than, say, the $87 million that is still owed back by the Migration film, it is going to be a lot harder for a film like that to do as well, just because of the state of the industry. Anyone But You is at $6 million, cost $25 million. Okay. It doesn't make sense for films like that to cost more than a film like Iron Claw, but I guess it is what it is. Right now, that's $33 million in the red. Needs to make around $62 million to break even. And then we get to the one that most people probably want to know about this weekend, and that is Aquaman. So Aquaman Lost Kingdom, this film cost roughly $205 million is what's being reported. As you all know, sometimes these budgets are actually higher than what's being reported, and so we'll have to wait and see. Based off of typical marketing costs, the film's break even is roughly around $512.5 million. Probably a more conservative estimate there that's using that 2.5 multiplier, which means that you're probably looking at this film being closer to $600 million break-even point if you use that 3 times multiplier, depending on its budget. But that means that right now it is at $242 million in the red, that this film is not doing much of anything, and because the film is just not good and is not getting a lot of positive reaction outside of maybe hardcore DCEU fans, you're not going to see this film do much of anything, and I think we could ultimately say this film will be a flop. Remember that most films tend to make about 3 times their global total in their, based off of their first opening weekend, right? I usually make firm projections after week 2 because that week 2 drop-off can make a huge difference, but as far as just in general, most films, indeed, 3 times their actual global opening is what they tend to make in the long run, or at least about half of what it is. So you're still looking at this film maybe capping out somewhere between 2 and maybe, $200 to $300 million worldwide, based off of those numbers and based on those metrics. So we'll have to wait and see where it does, but it ain't looking good. Warner Brothers is in a lot of financial trouble, and I'll be doing a fuller breakdown of Universal, rather in this case, Warner Brothers box office and its yearly box office in a bit. I've actually started working on some of that charting. Right now I'm on Sony. I'll work on Universal and Warner Brothers next. I've already talked about why Disney's chart is insane and why it's in such a bad state. Right here is the more recent up-to-date number, still $1.4 billion in financial losses for Disney just from this past year. Oh boy. And that's still not including any of the actual budgets as those get released over time, or any potential marketing budget differences either. So anyway, right now, those are the numbers, though, as they stand. I really don't think there's much less to talk about. Let's see. Boy and the Heron is still financial loss just because of the way it's been released. Godzilla Minus One at $63 million worldwide has around $15 million as far as net gain profits. So it's definitely going to be one of the more profitable movies this year, especially compared to its overall budget. Let's see, right now it's about 4.2 times its budget. So it's not going to be the highest. I mean, it's not going to be the levels of maybe a Five Nights at Freddy's, which had 14.7 times its budget. But it'll definitely be up there as it continues to make money here domestically. It has also a further release down the road internationally as well. I guess I could also talk about Wish. This film is also still $200+ million in the red. It is starting to see its increased release in the international markets, but I just don't think there's going to be nearly enough market, nearly enough people out there who have any interest in going to see this movie, even in those markets that have not been accounted for yet. And again, these numbers seem to indicate that it might have a similar performance as a similar film from earlier this year, and that, of course, would be Elemental. But just like with Elemental having that delayed release over time, that being said, even though Elemental was able to do it with that same type of delayed release, right, overall, its first 2 weeks only accounted for a quarter of its entire box office. That film got up to $486 million. We're just not seeing Wish being even in the same category, especially when you compare the film to that release. The fact that, in fact, I didn't even realize that I had not talked about Wish because it had already dropped out. The fact that Wish over the holiday season is number 13 at the box office, that is really, really bad. It dropped another 64%. And as you can see, just as I had predicted, 1,300 screens is what they dropped. So going into the holiday frame, Disney has now basically given up on Wish, saying we don't really think the film's going to do much of anything anymore. Just as they gave up with the Marvels. Marvel's now only at 220 screens. Do not be surprised if every week now from this point on, including post-holiday frame, we see similar drops as well. So Wish, another massive, massive financial disappointment for Disney. And again, when you have over $1.5 billion in financial losses for your year, it can't be all that surprising. But anyway, what are y'all's thoughts? Have you seen Aquaman Lost Kingdom? I saw it. It was just bad. It's just as bad as pretty much every other DCE film that's ever been released. This film especially has this global warming message that it really hits you in the face with nonstop. I mean, and some people might say, well, you're more susceptible to that kind of thing anyway. No, it's really bad. Even if you like the film, I think that you would at the very least have to admit, yeah, it's a little bit heavy-handed with its messaging in that way. But let me know your thoughts about that, about Wonka, which I finally also got to see. I thought it was fine. I thought it was okay. It's a decent movie. Not great, but also really not all that offensive either. I think a lot of people will enjoy it. But The Iron Claw is really the movie for me that I want to promote this week. So Godzilla Minus One, go see it if you have not seen it. Iron Claw, it is definitely an R-rated film, and it earns its R rating, and it's a very tough movie to watch. But if you enjoy wrestling, or at the very least you enjoy very good cast who are in the process of developing these characters and showing the brotherly bond that exists, especially in a larger family, I think that it might be something that you might want to check out. So let me know your thoughts about that. And the last thing I'll mention is right now, the vote is open for the categories for this year's Raven Awards. The Raven Awards are right around the corner, everybody. It is our yearly reminder that Hollywood is stupid, that the Oscars have become so irrelevant that we've decided just to make our own award show, because why not? It's about as relevant as the Oscars are anyway, and it's growing irrelevancy every single year. So what this means is this is going to be, hey, do we keep the category as it is, or do we change it? So you can let your voice be heard about whether or not you think the category names should be the same, whether they should be changed, or whether they should just be dropped altogether. Totally up to you. You can find a link to this on my social media. I might try to put this also in the pinned comment below this video, but if not, go to my Discord, go to my X or Twitter profile, and you'll be able to find the link there in my highlighted post and let your voice be heard there. Anyway, let me know your thoughts about any of these things in the comment section down below. Like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button, honestly, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Christmas Eve, a blessed Christmas, and as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of November, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, the name Eagle Rider, Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Sorry, I didn't have enough spirit fingers there. Mr. Roy and ZK-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below. You get access to things like the giveaways channel, a podcast that I try to do every single month with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers, and a plethora of other content. So go ahead and check that out if you want more. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.